The oak dining table wasn't supposed to have a scratch. Garrett Bishop ran his thumb along the gouge near the fourth chair's edge, shallow enough that most people wouldn't notice, deep enough that he did. The elderly couple standing in their Arlington living room smiled at each other, already picturing Sunday dinners with grandchildren, oblivious to the imperfection that made Garrett's jaw tighten. Mrs. Peterson traced the beveled edge with evident delight. "It's beautiful. Even better than the photos." Her husband nodded, pulling out his checkbook. "Worth every penny." Garrett's hand remained on the scratch. 3 months of work. Walnut harvested from a fallen tree in Vermont, each plank chosen for grain and character joinery, so tight you couldn't slide paper between the seams. He'd promised them perfection, and perfection didn't include damage from a careless moment loading his truck. "I'll make you a new one." Mr. Peterson looked up from his checkbook. "Excuse me?" "The scratch. Right here." Garrett indicated the flaw. "I'll build you another table. 2 weeks. No charge." Mrs. Peterson leaned closer, squinting. "Honey, I don't even see what you're talking about." "It's there." The couple exchanged a glance. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. "Son, we're 73 years old. Our eyesight isn't what it used to be, and frankly, we don't care about a scratch we can't see. This table is perfect." "It's not what I promised you." Something shifted in Mrs. Peterson's expression, a softening that Garrett had seen before in older women who recognized stubbornness that wouldn't bend. She placed her hand over his, still resting on the scratch. "Young man, I've been married 49 years. I learned a long time ago that perfect doesn't exist. Good enough is plenty." Garrett pulled his hand back. "I'll have the new one delivered in 2 weeks." He left before they could argue further, the check still in Mr. Peterson's hand. Outside, November wind stripped the last leaves from the maples lining the street. His truck sat at the curb, empty bed still bearing sawdust from the table he'd just refused to sell. $3,000 he didn't take because of a scratch most people would need a magnifying glass to find. Owen would call him an idiot. Probably use stronger language. The drive back to his workshop took 20 minutes through downtown Millbrook, past the pharmacy where he'd filled Natalie's prescriptions, past the elementary school where Clara would start 2nd grade next fall, past the cemetery where he left flowers every Sunday without fail. 3 years since the funeral. People kept telling him it got easier. People were wrong. His phone buzzed at a red light. Clara's school. He answered before the second ring. "Mr. Bishop, this is Principal Morrison." "Clara's fine, but we need you to come pick her up." His pulse spiked despite her reassurance. "What happened?" "She's in my office. Not in trouble, just, I think it's better if we discuss this in person." 20 minutes became 8. He parked crookedly outside the main entrance and found Clara sitting in a chair that dwarfed her 7-year-old frame legs, swinging above the floor, eyes red but dry. She looked up when he entered, and something in her expression reminded him so sharply of Natalie that his breath caught. Principal Morrison gestured to the empty chair beside Clara. "She had an incident during lunch. Got into an argument with another student about families." Garrett sat angling toward his daughter. "What kind of argument?" Clara's voice came small and tight. "Mia said her dad has a new girlfriend and it's normal because people get new families all the time. She said you should get a girlfriend too." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The principal shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable. "And what did you say?" "I said Mommy wouldn't want you to have a girlfriend, that you're supposed to love Mommy forever." Clara's chin trembled. "Then Mia said Mommy's dead and dead people don't care. So I pushed her." Garrett closed his eyes. When he opened them, Principal Morrison was watching him with the careful expression of someone who'd dealt with grieving families before. "I've already spoken with Mia's parents. They understand these are complicated emotions for children to navigate. No one is being suspended, but Clara does owe Mia an apology." "I know." Clara's voice dropped to barely audible. "I'm sorry I pushed her. Sorry I pushed. But Daddy does love Mommy forever, right? That's what you're supposed to do." The question landed like a hammer. Garrett looked at his daughter, 7 years old, and already carrying the weight of loss she shouldn't understand yet, and couldn't find words that wouldn't be either a lie or a truth. He wasn't ready to speak. "We'll talk about it at home, sweetheart." The drive back was silent. Clara stared out the window, occasionally swiping at her eyes. Garrett's hands gripped the steering wheel hard enough to make his knuckles white. When they pulled into the driveway of their small craftsman house on Elm Street, Clara unbuckled herself but didn't move to get out. "Daddy?" "Yeah, Ladybug?" "Can you love two people at the same time?" His breath stopped. "What kind of question is that?" "My friend Hazel has a stepdad. She loves him, but she still loves her real dad who lives in California. She says love doesn't run out, it just gets bigger." Clara turned to face him fully. "Is that true?" Garrett thought about Natalie, about the promise he'd made in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and dying flowers. About the ring he still wore, the side of the bed he still didn't sleep on, the future he'd buried along with his wife. About the box in his dresser drawer containing another ring, older and cheaper, bought with scraped-together money when he was 22 and stupid enough to believe love was enough. "I don't know, sweetheart." "But if it was true, would that be okay?" The question lodged in his chest. He thought about Mrs. Peterson's hand on his, insisting that good enough was plenty. Thought about how he'd driven away from $3,000 because perfection was the only standard he could control when everything else had fallen apart. "Come on, let's get you inside." Clara didn't push further. She climbed out of the truck and went straight to her room, closing the door with a gentleness that felt worse than slamming. Garrett stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the life he'd built from wreckage. Natalie's cookbook still on the counter spine, broken at her mother's pot roast recipe. Clara's school artwork covering the refrigerator. Photos on every surface, moments frozen before cancer turned their future into a countdown. He opened the cabinet above the sink, pulled down the whiskey he allowed himself once a month, poured 2 fingers into a clean glass. 3 years. People said it got easier. People were liars. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, then remembered the message from earlier about his property. Probably another developer trying to buy his workshop. They'd been circling for months, sensing blood in the water. Small business owner, widower, raising a kid, alone workshop sitting on land that would be worth triple if someone bulldozed it and put up condos. He let it go to voicemail, drank the whiskey in one swallow, and went to check on Clara. She was sitting on her bed, surrounded by the stuffed animals Natalie had collected since the day they'd learned she was pregnant. Clara held the oldest one, a threadbare rabbit with one ear missing. "Mommy gave me Hopper." "I know. Do you think she can see me like from heaven?" Garrett sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. He wasn't a religious man, had never been, but Natalie had believed in something beyond the dark. He owed her memory the benefit of that doubt. "I think if anyone could find a way, it'd be your mom." Clara hugged the rabbit tighter. "If she can see us, then she knows if you're happy or sad." "Right. Probably. So if you were sad forever, she'd know. And she'd be sad too." The logic was irrefutable, delivered with the clarity only children possessed. Garrett looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw Natalie's eyes, his stubborn chin, a person forming from the best parts of both of them, a person who deserved more than a father frozen in grief. "Your mom made me promise something before she died." Clara's eyes widened. "What?" "She made me promise I'd try to be happy again, that I wouldn't stay sad forever." "Did you promise?" "I did." "But you're still sad." "Yeah, Ladybug, I am." Clara processed this, her 7-year-old mind working through complications that shouldn't be hers to navigate. Finally, she set Hopper aside and crawled into Garrett's lap, something she hadn't done in months. He wrapped his arms around her, felt her small frame against his chest, and wondered how Natalie had done this alone during all those months he'd worked late to build the business they'd needed to survive. "I miss her too, Daddy." "I know you do." They sat like that until Clara fell asleep, exhausted from emotional upheaval. Garrett carried her to bed properly, pulled the covers up, kissed her forehead. In the hallway, he paused at the master bedroom door, looking at the bed. He still only slept on one side of the dresser that still held Natalie's jewelry box, the closet where her clothes hung untouched. He opened the top drawer of his dresser, pushed aside socks, and found the small wooden box he'd made in high school shop class. Inside 2 rings, the wedding band he still wore, and the cheap diamond engagement ring he'd bought 12 years ago for a woman who'd vanished without explanation or goodbye. Vivian Hartley. He hadn't thought about her in years, had trained himself not to the same way he'd trained himself to measure twice and cut once to sand with the grain to accept that some breaks couldn't be fixed. She'd disappeared between their junior and senior year of college there one day and gone the next. Her roommate had claimed she'd transferred, but Vivian's phone went straight to voicemail. Her social media went dark. Her parents refused to speak to him when he'd driven 2 hours to their house in Connecticut. He'd been 22 and convinced they were forever. Had saved for 6 months to buy the ring, planned the proposal for graduation day. Instead, he'd spent the summer after junior year drunk and broken, trying to understand how someone could disappear so completely from a life you'd thought was shared. Then he'd met Natalie at the hardware store where he'd picked up part-time work. She'd been funny and practical with none of Vivian's intensity, none of the storm that had defined his first love. Natalie had been steady water instead of wildfire, and he'd learned to be grateful for calm after chaos. Now both women were gone, one by choice, one by cruel biology. And he was standing in his bedroom at 9:30 on a Wednesday night, holding 2 rings that represented everything he'd lost. He put the box back, closed the drawer, and went downstairs to finally check the voicemail. "Mr. Bishop, this is Patricia Keene with Hartley Development Group. We're proposing a commercial development on Mill Street, and your property has been identified as essential to the project. We're prepared to make a very generous offer. Please call me back at your earliest convenience to discuss terms." Hartley. The name hit him like a fist. Common enough surname, could be coincidence, probably was coincidence. Vivian's family had been in Connecticut, old money and older disdain for the scholarship kid dating their daughter. No reason they'd be developing property in a nothing town in western Massachusetts. He deleted the voicemail without calling back, poured another whiskey he shouldn't have, and sat at the kitchen table Natalie had painted white 3 months before her diagnosis. The silence pressed down heavy and familiar. This was his life now. Working himself to exhaustion, raising Clara alone, turning down money and opportunities because he couldn't let go of anything, couldn't move forward, couldn't keep the promise he'd made to a dying woman who deserved better than what cancer had given her. His phone buzzed again. Text from Owen, his foreman and closest friend. "Heard you turned down the Peterson job. You're an idiot." Garrett typed back, "Scratch on the table." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "It's a table, not the Sistine Chapel. Come to the workshop tomorrow. We need to talk about the Mill Street thing." The Mill Street thing. His workshop sat on Mill Street, had for 8 years, since before Clara was born. Natalie had helped him pour the foundation, pregnant and stubborn, insisting she could mix cement despite Garrett's protests. They'd built it together, turned it from empty shell into functional workspace. Hung the sign that read Bishop Woodworks, in letters Garrett had carved himself. The developers could offer 10 times market value, and it wouldn't matter. Some things weren't for sale. He finished the whiskey, checked that all the doors were locked, and climbed the stairs to the bedroom, where he still only slept on the left side. Tomorrow he'd deal with Clara's school situation, talk to Owen about the development proposal, maybe finally call back Mrs. Peterson and agree to let them keep the scratch table. Maybe. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and thought about Vivian's face the last time he'd seen her. They'd been at her dorm planning summer break, talking about the apartment they'd rent senior year. She'd kissed him goodbye, told him she loved him, and 2 days later every trace of her had vanished like smoke. For years he'd wondered what he'd done wrong. For years after that, he'd stopped wondering. And then Natalie had taught him that love could be something other than intensity, and chaos could be steady and sure and still deep enough to drown in when it ended. Sleep came eventually, restless and thin. He dreamed of workshops and hospitals, of rings that didn't fit, and tables that couldn't be perfect, of women who disappeared, and women who stayed until they couldn't anymore. Morning arrived, gray and cold. Clara emerged from her room subdued, ate breakfast in silence, allowed Garrett to drive her to school without the usual chatter about upcoming tests or playground politics. Before she got out of the truck, she turned to him with Natalie's serious expression. "I'm going to apologize to Mia." "Good. But I still think Mommy wouldn't want you sad forever." She was gone before he could respond, backpack bouncing as she ran toward the entrance. Garrett watched until she disappeared inside, then drove to the workshop instead of returning home. The building sat at the end of Mill Street, backing up to woods that provided privacy and peace. His truck was the only vehicle in the gravel lot. Inside smelled of sawdust and linseed oil, familiar enough to be almost comforting. Half-finished projects occupied every workbench. A commissioned bookshelf for the library, a cradle for Owen's daughter who was due in February, a jewelry box Garrett was making Clara for Christmas. Work kept his hands busy and his mind quieter than it would be otherwise. He'd been sanding the jewelry box for 20 minutes when Owen arrived carrying 2 cups of coffee from the diner down the street. He set one on Garrett's workbench without comment, sipped his own, and watched Garrett work. Finally, "You can't keep it." "Watch me. They're offering $480,000, Garrett. You could buy land anywhere, build a new workshop twice this size, and still have enough left over to send Clara to college." "Not selling. Because Natalie helped build it." Garrett's hand stilled on the sandpaper. "Because it's mine. It's a building. Buildings can be replaced. So I've been told." Owen set his coffee down, pulled up a stool. He was 48 years older than Garrett, with the weathered face of someone who'd worked with his hands his whole life. He'd been Garrett's first hire, had become more brother than employee, had held Garrett together during the worst of Natalie's illness. "I'm not saying you have to sell. I'm saying you should at least hear them out. Take the meeting. See what they're offering." "Already know what they're offering. Woman left a voicemail. And I'm not interested." Owen studied him. "The company's called Hartley Development. Ring any bells?" The coffee turned bitter in Garrett's mouth. "Should it? Vivian Hartley. The girl who vanished on you senior year." Owen had heard the story years ago during a night when Garrett had drunk too much and talked too freely. "Looked her up. She's a lawyer now. Left some big firm in Boston, moved back to the area a few months ago. Her brother runs the development company." The jewelry box blurred. Garrett set down the sandpaper carefully, precisely the way he did everything. "Coincidence. Hartley's a common name." "Maybe. Or maybe fate decided you haven't been through enough shit and needs to pile on more." "Not fate. Just bad luck." "You going to the town council meeting Thursday?" Garrett had forgotten about it. The development proposal would be on the agenda, open for public comment. Property owners affected by the project were encouraged to attend. "No. Garrett, I said no. I'm not selling. They can't make me sell. End of story." Owen finished his coffee in silence. Finally he stood, stretched his back. "Your call, but running from things hasn't worked out great for you historically." He left before Garrett could argue. The workshop fell quiet except for the sound of sandpaper against wood rhythm, as familiar as breathing. Garrett worked until his shoulders ached, until the jewelry box was smooth enough that Clara would never get a splinter, until he couldn't avoid the truth anymore. Vivian Hartley was back. After 12 years of silence, after vanishing so completely, he'd wondered if she'd ever existed. She was back. And apparently, she wanted his workshop. He finished for the day around 3, cleaned his tools with the meticulous care Natalie had always teased him about locked up. The drive home took him past Town Hall, where a banner announced Thursday's council meeting. 7 o'clock. Open to the public. He wouldn't go. Couldn't. What would be the point? He'd already decided not to sell. Seeing Vivian again after everything, after Natalie, after building a life from the wreckage of what she'd destroyed? No. Some doors stayed closed for good reason. At home he started dinner before Clara got off the bus. Spaghetti simple enough that he couldn't ruin it, familiar enough that Clara wouldn't complain. The school bus arrived at 3:45 exactly. Clara burst through the door with more energy than she'd shown that morning. "I apologized to Mia, and we're friends again, and she said her dad's girlfriend is actually really nice and makes good cookies, and—" She stopped for breath. "Can I have a snack? Apple slices in the fridge." She grabbed the container settled at the kitchen table with her homework. Garrett stirred sauce, watched his daughter form careful letters on spelling worksheets, and felt the familiar ache of Natalie's absence. She should be here. Should be checking homework and planning dinner and navigating the complicated emotional terrain of raising a daughter who was growing up too fast. Daddy. Yeah, Ladybug. If you met someone nice, would you tell me? The spoon paused mid-stir. What? Mia said her dad dated 3 ladies before he found the right one. She said her dad told her about all of them first, so she wouldn't be surprised. Clara's pencil hovered over her worksheet. So if you met someone, would you tell me before you decided if she was the right one? Garrett turned off the stove, sat down across from his daughter. I'm not dating anyone. I know, but if you did. Then yes, I'd tell you. Clara nodded, apparently satisfied, and returned to her spelling. Garrett watched her, this small person who was half him and half Natalie and entirely herself, and wondered when exactly his 7-year-old had become wise enough to ask questions he couldn't answer. They ate dinner together at the table Natalie had painted. Clara talked about school, about the science project they'd start next week, about how her friend Emma was moving to Florida, and would she ever make friends who stayed. Garrett made appropriate noises, asked follow-up questions, and tried not to think about Thursday's meeting. He wouldn't attend. After dinner, after homework was checked and teeth were brushed, and Hopper the rabbit was tucked in beside Clara, Garrett returned to the kitchen. His phone sat on the counter where he'd left it. No new messages. He pulled up the browser, typed Vivian Hartley lawyer before he could stop himself. The results loaded. Top hit was a profile from a Boston law firm dated 2 years ago. Professional photo, dark hair, pulled back, expression serious. Definitely her. Older, sharper, but unmistakably the woman who'd taken his cheap ring and his expensive trust and vanished with both. The bio was sparse. Harvard Law, graduated top of her class, specialized in public interest law and housing advocacy. Formerly with Preston and Clark in Boston, currently practicing in Western Massachusetts. He scrolled down, found a newspaper article from 6 months ago about a case she'd won for tenants facing eviction. Another article praising her pro bono work. Nothing personal, no mention of family relationships, why she'd left a prestigious firm for small-town practice. Nothing about where she'd been 12 years ago, or why she'd disappeared, or whether she'd ever thought about the boy she'd left behind with a ring that never got presented. Garrett closed the browser, deleted his search history like that would make the impulse go away. He poured himself water instead of whiskey, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at nothing. Thursday arrived, whether he wanted it to or not. He dropped Clara at school, went to the workshop, avoided Owen's knowing looks. At 6:30, he told himself he was going home. At 6:45, he found himself driving toward Town Hall instead. The parking lot was fuller than expected. Inside, the council chamber hummed with conversation. Garrett recognized faces: the owner of the diner, the pharmacist, several people whose workshops or businesses sat on Mill Street. He took a seat in the back row, told himself he'd leave after the first presentation. The council called the meeting to order at 7 sharp. Agenda items were addressed in bureaucratic sequence: budget discussions, zoning variance requests, permit approvals. Garrett's attention drifted until the mayor announced the Hartley development proposal. A man in an expensive suit approached the podium. Tall, polished, the kind of confidence money and breeding produced. He introduced himself as Preston Hartley, principal of Hartley Development Group, and launched into a presentation about mixed-use commercial space, tax revenue, job creation. Garrett stopped listening. He was watching the woman who'd entered through the side door, carrying a briefcase and a folder, moving with the careful precision of someone prepared for battle. Vivian. 12 years fell away. She wore a navy suit instead of the jeans and vintage band shirts she'd favored in college. Her hair was styled instead of wild, but her face, God, her face was the same. Older, yes, but the same serious expression, the same way she bit her lower lip when concentrating. She didn't see him. Her attention stayed fixed on Preston, on the council, on the charts and projections being presented. Garrett sat frozen, watching this stranger who was somehow still familiar, and felt everything he'd buried come roaring back. Preston finished his presentation. The council opened the floor for questions. Several business owners expressed support. The pharmacist asked about construction timeline. The diner owner wanted assurances about parking. Then Preston said, Our legal counsel will address specific property concerns." Vivian stood, walked to the podium, opened her folder. Her voice was professional, measured nothing like the passionate intensity he remembered from late-night conversations about changing the world. She explained property acquisition process, compensation offers, projected timeline, mentioned several businesses by name, including Bishop Woodworks. Garrett's hands clenched on the chair arms. The mayor asked about holdouts. Preston smiled smooth and practiced. "We're confident all property owners will see the mutual benefit of this development. And if they don't," this from the council member who ran the hardware store, "we have mechanisms to address that." Preston glanced at Vivian. "Ms. Hartley can elaborate." She opened her mouth. Her eyes swept the room, a lawyer's practiced assessment of her audience. They landed on Garrett. The folder slipped from her hands. Papers scattered across the podium, cascading onto the floor in a flutter of proposals and projections. Vivian stood frozen, her face draining of color, staring at Garrett like he was a ghost made solid. The room went silent. Preston turned to see what had broken his lawyer's composure. Vivian bent to gather papers, hands shaking visibly even from the back row. Garrett stood. Every instinct screamed to leave, to run, to preserve what little peace he'd managed to construct from wreckage. Instead, he walked down the center aisle past curious faces and whispered speculation until he stood 10 feet from the podium. Vivian straightened papers clutched to her chest. Her lips formed his name, no sound. The mayor cleared his throat. "Ms. Hartley, are you all right?" She didn't answer. Couldn't, apparently. Just stared at Garrett with an expression he couldn't read, shock, fear, something that might have been grief. Preston stepped forward, protective and territorial. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess." Garrett found his voice. "No need. I just wanted to inform the council that Bishop Woodworks will not be participating in this development. My property isn't for sale." Preston's expression hardened. "Mr. Bishop, I'm sure if we sat down and discussed the very generous terms, not for sale means not for sale. Everything has a price." "Not this." Vivian finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "Garrett." 12 years of silence. 12 years of unanswered questions. 12 years of building a life after she'd destroyed the one they'd planned, and all she could say was his name. He turned to the council. "That's all I wanted to say. I'll be opposing this development in writing." He walked out before anyone could respond, before Vivian could say anything else, before the careful walls he'd built could crumble completely. Outside, November air hit cold and clean. His truck sat in the lot, haven and escape. Behind him the door opened. Footsteps hurried across pavement. "Garrett, wait, please." He stopped. Didn't turn. 12 years, Vivian. 12 years of nothing. You don't get to wait, please me now. I can explain. I don't want explanations. I need to tell you what happened. Why I left. That made him turn. She stood 5 feet away, professional armor in place except for her eyes, which held something raw and desperate. "You left without a word, changed your number. Your roommate said you transferred. Your parents wouldn't talk to me. I drove to Connecticut 3 times trying to find you. I know. You know. You knew I was looking for you, and you still—" He stopped, breathed, regained control. "I don't care anymore. Whatever your reasons were, they stopped mattering a long time ago. I was pregnant." The words landed like a hammer. Traffic hummed on the street. Inside the meeting continued muffled voices debating development that wouldn't happen. Garrett stood in a parking lot and felt reality tilt. "What?" "I was pregnant. 14 weeks. I found out right before summer break." Vivian's voice shook. "I was going to tell you. Had it all planned. But my parents found the test and they—" She stopped, swallowed. "They gave me an ultimatum. Get rid of it or lose everything. Family money support. I refused. So they locked me up." The parking lot spun. "They what?" "Locked me in my room. Took my phone. Wouldn't let me leave. Wouldn't let me contact you." Preston stood guard. Tears streaked her face now, reflecting streetlight. "I was going to run. Find you, figure it out together. But the stress, the fighting, being trapped, I miscarried. 16 weeks. Lost the baby without ever getting to tell you it existed. Garrett couldn't breathe, couldn't process. A baby. Their baby. Gone before he'd known to hope for it. "I'm sorry." Vivian's voice broke. "I'm so sorry. I should have fought harder, should have found a way to reach you, should have—" "Why didn't you come back after? Why stay gone for 12 years? I tried. 3 years ago I hired an investigator. Found you married with a daughter. You looked happy in the photos. I wouldn't destroy that. 3 years ago. The year Natalie died. The worst year of his life, and Vivian had looked at photos and seen happiness. My wife died. 3 years ago. Cancer." Vivian's face crumpled. "Oh, God. Garrett, I didn't know. I stopped checking after I saw the wedding pictures." They stood in the parking lot, separated by 5 feet and 12 years, and losses that couldn't be quantified. Inside, Preston was probably spinning the interruption, reassuring the council that minor complications wouldn't derail progress. Out here, 2 people who'd loved each other once stood in the wreckage of what might have been. "I can't do this." Garrett's voice came out rough. "I can't, whatever you want, whatever explanation makes you feel better, I can't hear it right now. I'm withdrawing from the case. I'll tell Preston tonight. I won't work against you." "You don't have to do that." "Yes, I do." Vivian wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "Because I'm not that scared 20-year-old anymore, and I won't let my family destroy anything of yours ever again." She walked back inside, leaving Garrett alone with revelations that rewrote history. A baby. He'd almost been a father 12 years before Clara was born. Almost had a life with Vivian that her family had stolen along with their child. He got in his truck, drove home on autopilot, and sat in the driveway for 20 minutes before going inside. Clara was already asleep, the sitter reading on the couch. He paid her, waited for her to leave, then climbed the stairs to his bedroom. The wooden box in his dresser called to him. He opened it, took out the cheap engagement ring, held it up to the light. It had seemed like forever when he'd bought it, had seemed like the beginning of everything that mattered. Instead, it had been the end of something he'd never fully understood until tonight. He put the ring away, climbed into bed on the left side where he'd slept alone for 3 years, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. Dawn arrived without permission. Garrett hadn't slept, had spent the hours between midnight and morning reconstructing a past that made sense with new information inserted into old gaps. A baby. Vivian pregnant and terrified while he'd been planning their future oblivious. Her family locking her away while he'd called her phone obsessively, leaving messages that went unanswered. The miscarriage happening while he'd driven to Connecticut for the 3rd time, turned away at the gate by security who'd looked at him like he was dangerous. Clara stirred upstairs at 6:30. Garrett rose, made breakfast, mechanically poured juice and toasted bread while his mind replayed Vivian's face in the parking lot. The devastation when he'd mentioned Natalie's death. The way she'd said she wouldn't let her family destroy anything of his again, as though 12 years hadn't already accomplished that task thoroughly. Clara appeared in pajamas, hopper tucked under one arm. She studied Garrett with the unsettling perception children wielded without knowing it was a weapon. "You look tired. Couldn't sleep. Bad dreams." "Something like that." She ate her cereal in silence, occasionally glancing at him with questions she was smart enough not to ask. The bus came at 7:40. Garrett watched her climb aboard backpack too large for her small frame and wondered what Natalie would say about last night, about Vivian returning, about the baby that had been lost before it could be real. His phone buzzed. Text from Owen. "Saw the council meeting drama on town Facebook. You okay?" Garrett stared at the message. Small towns and their digital gossip mills. He typed back, "Survived? Barely." 3 dots appeared. "Come to the workshop when you're ready. We need to talk." The workshop felt safer than home with its familiar smells and predictable routines. Owen was already inside when Garrett arrived, coffee in hand, expression carefully neutral. "So, your ex-girlfriend is the lawyer trying to take your property." That about sums it up. "And she was pregnant 12 years ago, lost the baby. Her family locked her up." Owen held up his phone. Town Facebook is very thorough. Garrett grabbed sandpaper, attacked the jewelry box with more force than necessary. I don't want to talk about it. Tough. Because Monday you're meeting with her brother Preston, and I need to know if you're going to make smart decisions or emotional ones. I already decided. Not selling. Even after hearing her explanation, the sandpaper stilled. She had reasons. Doesn't change anything. Doesn't it? Owen set down his coffee. Look, I get being angry. She disappeared on you, that's facts. But she was 20 years old and her family terrorized her. That's facts, too. You taking her side? I'm taking the side where you don't make decisions based on 12-year-old pain. Owen moved closer. Natalie wouldn't want you refusing to sell just to punish Vivian's family. She'd want you doing what's actually right for you and Clara. The mention of Natalie's name felt like a weapon. Garrett set down the sandpaper before he sanded through to bare wood. I need to think. Alone. Owen left without argument. The workshop fell silent except for Garrett's breathing and the distant sound of traffic on Mill Street. He pulled out his phone, stared at it, then typed before he could reconsider. Can we talk today? Vivian's response came within seconds. Riverside Park, 2 o'clock. I'll be there. The hours until 2 o'clock dragged. Garrett worked mechanically, accomplishing nothing of substance. At 1:30 he locked up, drove to the park, arrived early. Vivian was already there, sitting on a bench near the river in jeans and a sweater that made her look less like the polished lawyer from last night and more like the college girl he'd loved. She stood when she saw him. You came. Said I would. They walked without discussing destination, following the river path through sections of park that had and hadn't changed. For 10 minutes neither spoke, just moved through space together like they had when conversations weren't complicated by loss and time. Finally Vivian broke silence. I need to tell you the rest. About what happened after. There's more context. The parts that explain why I stayed gone even after I was free. She stopped walking, faced him directly. When I lost the baby, I was 16 weeks, far enough along that I had to deliver. They took me to a hospital an hour away, used a fake name, claimed I'd had a miscarriage from stress, which was technically true. Garrett felt something crack in his chest. Vivian, let me finish, please. Her voice shook but held. After the hospital, Preston drove me home. I was physically broken, emotionally destroyed, and he sat me down and told me if I ever contacted you, they'd make sure you lost everything. Your scholarship, your reputation, your future. He said their lawyers could bury you, that fighting them would destroy your life. And you believed him. I was 20, and I'd just delivered a dead baby, and yes, I believed him. Tears streaked her face now. So I disappeared. Changed my number, transferred schools, cut contact with anyone who knew both of us. I told myself I was protecting you. They reached the clearing where he'd told her he loved her the first time. The memory landed heavy. Garrett sat on a fallen log, and after a moment Vivian joined him. When did you reconnect with your family? 3 years ago. My father had a stroke, asked to see me. When I got there, he apologized. Said locking me up was the worst thing he'd ever done, that he'd destroyed his relationship with his daughter over pride. Vivian's laugh was bitter. Preston apologized too. Said he thought he was protecting me from making a mistake that would ruin my life. So you forgave them? Eventually. Partially. She pulled at the grass beside the log. That's when I hired the investigator to find you. Thought maybe enough time had passed, maybe you'd moved on enough that I could apologize without destroying everything again. But I was married. You looked happy. In the photos, you and your wife and this beautiful little girl. You looked like you'd built exactly the life you deserved. Vivian's voice dropped. So I walked away again. Told myself it was for the best. Garrett thought about that year 2020. Natalie already sick, already dying, though they hadn't known how fast yet. The photos Vivian saw must have been from before the diagnosis, when they could still pretend normal was possible. My wife died 6 months after you looked us up. Vivian's face crumpled. I didn't know. I swear, Garrett, if I'd known what you would have come then. The question came out harsher than intended. Shown up while I was grieving while Clara was asking why Mommy wasn't coming home. I don't know. Maybe I would have tried to help, or maybe I would have stayed away because that's what I do run when things get hard. The honesty disarmed him. Garrett had expected excuses, justifications, the kind of self-defense that made anger easier to maintain. Instead, Vivian just acknowledged her cowardice without caveat. Preston's coming Monday to make an offer. I know. I withdrew from the case last night, told him I had a conflict of interest that made my participation impossible. How'd he take it? Badly. Threatened to cut me off from family business, said I was being emotional and unprofessional. Vivian stood paced to the edge of the clearing. He's going to push hard, Garrett. That's what Preston does. He identifies what you can't afford to lose and threatens it until you surrender. What can't I afford to lose? Time, money, peace of mind. He'll file code violations, tax audits, anything that makes keeping your workshop expensive and exhausting. She turned back. I've seen him do it before. He's relentless. Garrett absorbed this, turning it over. Why are you helping me? After everything, why fight your own family? Because I'm tired of letting them destroy things I care about. 12 years ago I was too young and scared to stand up to them. I'm not anymore. The admission landed with weight Garrett wasn't ready to examine. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. Text from Owen's wife, Rosa. Have Clara here. Owen said you needed time. Take your time, we're making cookies. Relief mixed with guilt. He'd forgotten about Clara's after-school pickup in the chaos of everything else. I need to get my daughter. Of course. Vivian moved toward the parking lot, then stopped. Garrett, wait. There's something else you should know. Preston's not just doing this for business. He's doing it because of me. What do you mean? When I quit the case, I told him why. Told him you were the man they'd forced me to leave 12 years ago, that I wouldn't help destroy your life a second time. Vivian's expression was pained. He got angry, said I was letting old emotions cloud my judgment. Said he'd prove you weren't worth protecting. So this is personal. For Preston, everything's personal. He sees this as proving he was right to keep us apart. She met Garrett's eyes fully. I'm sorry. I made this worse by telling him the truth. Or you made it clearer. Garrett moved toward his truck. Monday at 10, when Preston shows up. I want you there. Vivian's surprise showed. Why? Because if he's going to make this personal, I want someone who knows how he operates. He drove to Owen's house, where Clara met him at the door, covered in chocolate chips and flour. Rosa stood behind her, smiling. We made triple chocolate cookies. Clara says they're her specialty. I invented a new recipe, Daddy, with extra chips and marshmallows. The normalcy of it, his daughter covered in baking ingredients, proud of cookies that probably tasted terrible, grounded him in what mattered. This was real. Preston's threats and Vivian's apologies and family drama were noise around the core truth. Clara needed stability. In the truck heading home, Clara's chatter filled the silence. Stories about school, about Emma's new haircut, about the science fair project she wanted to do, about volcanoes. Then, with the abruptness children wielded, that lady at the council meeting. Do you know her? Garrett's hands tightened on the wheel. I knew her a long time ago, before your mom. She looked at you like she was sad, like when you look at Mommy's pictures sometimes. The observation was too accurate. It's complicated, Ladybug. Was she your girlfriend? Yes. Clara absorbed this, leg swinging against the seat. Did she hurt you? The question was asked with the same casual tone she'd use asking about dinner plans, but it landed like a hammer. Garrett thought about lies that would be easier, deflections that would postpone this conversation. But Clara deserved truth, even difficult truth. She did. But not because she wanted to, because she was scared and didn't know what else to do. Did she say sorry? She did. And did she mean it? Garrett pulled into their driveway before answering. I think so, but I'm not sure yet. Clara unbuckled herself, turned to face him with an expression far too serious for 7. Miss Roberts says when someone hurts you, you can forgive them if they say sorry and mean it. But you have to believe they won't do it again. That's very wise. Do you believe her that she won't hurt you again?" The question was simple and impossible. Garrett looked at his daughter. This small person who'd already learned about loss and grief and the complexity of human relationships and couldn't find an answer that felt true. "I don't know yet, sweetheart." Clara nodded, apparently satisfied. She grabbed her backpack and headed inside, leaving Garrett sitting in the truck trying to breathe. Sometimes grown-ups make things harder than they need to be, that's what Clara would say. 7 years old and already wiser than he'd been at 22. Inside, he made dinner while Clara did homework. Spaghetti again, simple and familiar. They ate together, Clara talking about her volcano project, Garrett making appropriate noises, while his mind circled Preston and Monday, and the choices that kept multiplying. After Clara was asleep, Garrett sat on the porch with coffee instead of whiskey. The street was quiet, November cold settling in. His phone sat beside him silent for once. He thought about Vivian's face when she'd talked about the baby, about Preston's threats, about the workshop Natalie had helped build. The porch light at Owen's house 2 streets over flickered on. A minute later, Owen walked up Garrett's driveway carrying 2 beers. "Rosa kicked me out, said I needed to talk sense into you before Monday. I don't need a lecture. Good, because I'm not giving one." Owen sat on the porch step, handed Garrett a beer despite the coffee already in his hand. "I'm asking a question. Do you still love her?" "Who?" "Don't play stupid." "Vivian, the woman who wrecked you 12 years ago." Garrett set down the coffee, opened the beer. "I loved my wife." "That's not what I asked. You can love Natalie and still have feelings for the one who got away. Both things can be true." The beer was cold against Garrett's palm. He drank instead of answering. Owen tried again. "Look, I'm not saying jump back into her arms. I'm saying don't let old pain make you stupid about new information. She was 20 and terrified. You were 22 and clueless. People change." "What if they don't?" "Then you find out by giving them a chance, not by assuming." Owen finished half his beer in one swallow. "Natalie made you promise to be happy. Holding on to anger isn't keeping that promise, it's hiding from it." The words landed like stones. Garrett thought about the promise made in a hospital room, about the 3 years since spent going through motions while calling it survival, about Clara asking if he believed Vivian wouldn't hurt him again. "I don't know how to trust her." "Then don't. Not yet." Owen stood, stretched his back. "But maybe stop assuming she's still the person who left. Maybe see who she actually is now." He left before Garrett could argue. The porch fell silent again, except for distant traffic and the sound of Garrett's own breathing. He finished the beer, checked on Clara one final time, then settled at the kitchen table with his laptop. Searching Preston Hartley development tactics yielded exactly what Vivian had warned about. Projects throughout New England, all successful, several involving property disputes resolved in Preston's favor. Articles about businesses that had refused to sell, then mysteriously faced code violations and legal challenges until selling became the easier option. One story stood out: a family bakery that had held out for 8 months. The owner was quoted saying anonymous complaints had piled up: health violations, noise complaints, parking issues. Legal fees mounted until the family accepted a buyout at half the original offer just to escape the pressure. Garrett closed the laptop. Preston would do the same to him, would apply pressure until resistance became unsustainable. The question was whether Garrett could endure it, whether keeping the workshop was worth what it would cost Clara in stress and instability. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, then saw the message preview. "Mr. Bishop, this is Vivian. New number. Don't react to what I'm about to tell you." He opened the full message. "Preston is at the building department right now with an inspector. I've been tracking his calendar since I quit the case. He's trying to prearrange code violations before Monday. I'm going there to stop him." Garrett's pulse spiked. He typed fast, "Vivian, don't." Her response cut him off. "I'm done letting my family destroy things I care about. 12 years late, but done." He was in his truck before conscious thought caught up. The building department was 20 minutes away, closed on Saturdays except for emergency inspections. Garrett drove faster than he should mind, racing through scenarios. What was Vivian planning? How would she stop Preston? And why was she risking her relationship with her family for a man she'd hurt 12 years ago? The building department parking lot was nearly empty. Preston's Mercedes sat near the entrance. As Garrett pulled in, he saw Vivian's sedan arrive from the opposite direction. She parked, got out, phone already at her ear. Garrett stayed in his truck watching. Preston emerged from the building, surprise clear even at this distance. Vivian approached him, and though Garrett couldn't hear the conversation, body language told the story. Preston, defensive arms crossed. Vivian holding up her phone like evidence. The confrontation lasted 3 minutes. Then Preston laughed. Garrett could see it even if he couldn't hear it, and walked to his Mercedes. But he didn't go back inside the building. Whatever Vivian had said or shown him, it had worked. After Preston drove away, Vivian stood alone in the parking lot. Her shoulders shook. Garrett watched her compose herself, watched her wipe her eyes, watched her walk back to her car with the careful precision of someone holding themselves together through force of will. He should leave, should drive away before she saw him preserve some distance. Instead, he got out of his truck and walked across the lot. "Garrett." She startled when she saw him. "What are you doing here?" "Got your text. Came to help." "It's handled." She pulled her keys from her pocket with shaking hands. "Preston won't be filing any complaints. Not yet, anyway." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That I've been documenting his calls with the inspector, that offering money for violations is bribery, and that I'd send everything to the ethics board if he didn't walk away." Vivian's smile was shaky. "He called my bluff, said I wouldn't burn my own brother." "But you would." "I told him I was tired of caring what the family thinks more than what's right." She unlocked her car. "He left, but he also said Mom's going to be furious when she finds out I threatened him, so expect escalation." Garrett absorbed this. Vivian had just destroyed her relationship with her family to protect his workshop, had chosen him over them in a way she'd been unable to do 12 years ago. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This just means Preston will get creative instead of obvious." She climbed into her car. "Monday at 10. I'll be there." She drove away before he could say anything else. Garrett stood in the empty parking lot as evening turned to dark, trying to process what he'd witnessed. Vivian standing up to Preston, risking everything, proving through action what words couldn't convey. Maybe Owen was right. Maybe people did change. Maybe the Vivian who'd run 12 years ago wasn't the same woman who'd just threatened her brother to protect Garrett's livelihood. The drive home was quieter than the drive there. At home, Clara was still asleep, dreaming whatever 7-year-olds dreamed. Garrett checked on her, then went to his bedroom where Natalie's photo kept its vigil. "She fought for me today. Chose me over her family." He spoke to the photo habit formed over 3 years. "I don't know what that means. Don't know if I can trust it. But I think—" He stopped, started again. "I think maybe I want to try." The photo offered no judgment. Natalie frozen mid-laugh, forever encouraging, forever gone. Sunday morning brought gray skies and Clara wanting pancakes. Garrett made them while she set the table, chattering about her upcoming science fair. After breakfast, they drove to the cemetery, the weekly ritual Garrett couldn't seem to break. Clara left flowers on Natalie's grave, talked to her mother about school and friends and the cookies she'd made. Garrett stood back, watching his daughter maintain connection with a woman she'd barely remember in 5 years. Memory faded. That was the cruel truth no one mentioned. On the drive home, Clara asked, "Daddy, can you love 2 people at the same time?" The question shouldn't have surprised him anymore. "Why do you ask?" "Because I love Mommy even though she's gone. But if you found someone new, I could love her too. It wouldn't make Mommy less special." 7-year-old wisdom cutting straight to truth adults spent years avoiding. Garrett pulled into their driveway before responding. "You're right, Ladybug. Love doesn't run out. It just gets bigger." "So if the sad lady from the meeting needed someone to love her, would that be okay?" The question was asked with Clara's usual directness, no manipulation or agenda, just seeking information about how the world worked. "It might be, someday, if I could trust her not to leave again." "Then I hope you can trust her, because you get sad when you're alone too much." She climbed out of the truck, leaving Garrett sitting with observations he couldn't refute. Inside, he made lunch while Clara worked on her volcano project, the afternoon passing in blessed normalcy. At 5, his phone buzzed. Text from Vivian. Preston told our mother about yesterday. She wants to meet with you tomorrow before the 10 o'clock meeting. I'm sorry. Garrett stared at the message. Grace Hartley entering the equation changed everything. Preston, he could handle businessman playing hardball. But Grace was the one who'd orchestrated Vivian's imprisonment 12 years ago, who'd decided a scholarship student wasn't good enough for her daughter. He typed back, "When and where?" She suggested 9 at the workshop. "I can be there too if you want." "No, I'll handle it alone." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Be careful. My mother makes reasonable sound appealing until you read the fine print." Garrett set down his phone. Tomorrow at 9, Grace Hartley. Tomorrow at 10, Preston. Both of them bringing offers and threats, both of them expecting him to fold under pressure. But he'd survived losing. Vivian survived watching Natalie die, survived 3 years of single parenthood. Rich people with their money and lawyers didn't scare him. Not anymore. That night, after Clara was asleep, Garrett pulled out the wooden box containing both rings, the engagement ring he'd bought for Vivian, the wedding ring he'd worn for Natalie. Both represented love that had ended, one by choice, one by cruel biology. He put them away without putting either on. Tomorrow he'd face the Hartley family and make decisions about his future. Tonight he'd just be a father who'd promised his daughter he'd try to be happy even when he wasn't sure what happy looked like anymore. Preston Hartley arrived at 9:50 in a black Mercedes that cost more than Garrett's workshop and land combined. He emerged wearing a suit that probably required its own insurance policy, carrying a leather briefcase that screamed old money and new arrogance. Owen had already made himself scarce claiming urgent business at the hardware store despite it being Monday morning. Garrett waited at his workbench, hands occupied with sandpaper and the jewelry box that still wasn't perfect enough. The bell chimed. Preston entered like he owned the building, already surveying the space with the calculating expression of someone pricing demolition costs. "Mr. Bishop, thank you for seeing me." "Didn't have much choice according to your text." Preston smiled, all practiced charm. "I prefer to think of it as persistent optimism." The door chimed again. Vivian stepped inside, dressed professionally but not formally, positioning herself between her brother and Garrett, with body language that suggested allegiance had shifted. Preston's smile flickered. "Vivian, I didn't realize you'd be joining us." "Garrett asked me to be here." "In what capacity you've withdrawn from the project?" "As someone who knows how you operate." The temperature in the workshop dropped several degrees. Preston set his briefcase on the nearest workbench, opened it with deliberate precision. "I came prepared to make Mr. Bishop an extremely generous offer. I hoped we could handle this professionally without family drama." Vivian crossed her arms. "Then make your offer and skip the intimidation tactics." Preston pulled out a folder, handed it to Garrett. Inside paperwork detailed an offer of $480,000 for the workshop and land, plus guaranteed first option on new commercial space in the completed development at significantly reduced rates. Additional clauses promised assistance with relocation costs, business interruption, compensation, even a provision for custom signage featuring Bishop Woodworks prominently. That's triple market value for your property, plus benefits that ensure your business not only survives but thrives in a better location. Preston's voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to winning. "You'd be foolish to refuse." Garrett set the folder down without reading past the first page. "Not interested." "You haven't even looked at the full terms." "Don't need to. I'm not selling." Preston's expression tightened. "Mr. Bishop, I understand attachment to a place. I do. But sentiment doesn't pay bills or secure your daughter's future. This offer represents financial security you'd be hard-pressed to achieve otherwise." "My daughter's secure enough." "Is she single father, modest income, no real assets beyond this building? What happens if you get injured? If business slows down? If Clara needs something you can't afford?" Preston leaned forward slightly. "I'm offering you a safety net. Most people would be grateful." Vivian's voice cut sharp. Preston, stop. I'm simply stating facts. You're manipulating, there's a difference. Preston turned to his sister with frustration bleeding through polish. I'm trying to complete a project that benefits this entire community. Jobs, revenue, modernization. One man's stubbornness shouldn't derail progress. One man's rights shouldn't be bulldozed by your ambition. The siblings stared at each other, years of family dynamics playing out in silence. Finally, Preston returned his attention to Garrett. Let me be direct. This development is happening. I've acquired every other property on Mill Street. You're the final piece. I can work around you if necessary, but it would be expensive and frankly vindictive. I'd prefer to part as allies. Then prefer something else. You're being unreasonable. I'm being clear. My answer is no. Preston closed his briefcase with controlled precision. I see. Then I suppose we'll handle this through alternative channels. I hope you have a good lawyer, Mr. Bishop. You're going to need one. He moved toward the door. Vivian blocked his path. What does that mean, alternative channels? It means I've been polite long enough. If Mr. Bishop wants to play hardball, I know how to pitch. Preston's civility cracked further. This building is 40 years old. I'm certain a thorough code inspection would reveal numerous violations. Electrical structural occupancy. The kind that require expensive remediation or closure until fixed. Garrett felt rage ignite. You're threatening to fabricate violations. I'm suggesting that proper inspections often reveal issues owners overlook. Ignorance doesn't exempt you from compliance. That's extortion. That's municipal governance. Buildings must meet code. Surely you agree safety matters. Vivian stepped closer to her brother. Preston, listen to yourself. You're threatening to abuse regulatory authority because someone won't sell you their property. This is exactly the corruption I left Boston to escape. This is business, something you'd understand if you hadn't thrown away your career for some misguided crusade. I threw away partnership at a firm that defended slumlords and helped corporations dodge accountability. Best decision I ever made. Preston's laugh was ugly. You're 32 and working in a strip mall office, making a third of what you should. But sure, excellent decision. At least I can look at myself in the mirror. Children, please. The words came from a woman entering through the door Preston had left open. She was 60-something, expensively dressed, carrying herself with the authority of someone accustomed to ending arguments through presence alone. If we're going to have family drama, let's not do it in front of strangers. Vivian's face drained. Mother, what are you doing here? Grace Hartley surveyed the workshop with the same calculating assessment her son had employed. Supporting my children's business venture. Preston mentioned there was resistance, so I thought I'd offer perspective. Garrett watched the family dynamic shift, Preston straightening as though seeking approval. Vivian tensing like prey, sensing predators. Grace approached him directly, extending a manicured hand. Mrs. Hartley, I understand you're the owner of this charming establishment. He shook her hand briefly. Garrett Bishop. Yes, I know. Vivian's mentioned you. Grace's smile was blade thin. It's interesting, isn't it, how the past circles back? I remember you from years ago, the scholarship student dating my daughter. Preston said you'd grown unreasonable. I said he wouldn't sell, Preston corrected. Same thing in my experience. Grace turned to examine the jewelry box on Garrett's workbench. This is lovely work. For someone special. My daughter. How old? 7. Wonderful age. Still believes her father can fix anything. Grace set the box down gently. Mr. Bishop, I'm going to be direct because I suspect you appreciate honesty. My son's development will proceed with or without your cooperation. We have significant resources, legal expertise, and political connections throughout this county. Fighting us would be expensive, exhausting, and ultimately futile. Vivian moved between them. Mother, you can't just... I'm stating reality, sweetheart. Mr. Bishop deserves to understand what he's up against. Grace's attention never left Garrett. However, I'm also a practical woman. If you truly won't sell, perhaps we can discuss alternatives. A long-term lease arrangement. Shared space in the new development. Something that preserves your business while allowing our project to proceed. The offer sounded reasonable, which made Garrett trust it less. What kind of lease? 10 years, favorable terms, guaranteed renewal options. You'd maintain operational control while we modernize the surrounding area. Everyone wins. Preston frowned. Mother, we discussed buying out, not accommodating. We discussed achieving our goals efficiently. If a lease accomplishes that with less conflict, I'm willing to explore it. Grace pulled out her phone. I'll have our attorneys draft something by Wednesday. You can review with counsel before deciding. Garrett looked at Vivian. She gave a tiny shake of her head, warning, I need time to think. Of course. Wednesday gives you 2 days. Surely that's sufficient for a decision this important. Grace moved toward the door, clearly expecting her children to follow. Preston, Vivian, let's give Mr. Bishop space to consider. Preston retrieved his briefcase without argument. Vivian hesitated, then followed her family outside. Through the window, Garrett watched them gather near the Mercedes. Grace spoke. Preston gesticulated. Vivian stood with arms crossed. Eventually, Vivian broke away, returning to the workshop alone. Don't trust anything she offers. Gathered that. My mother makes reasonable sound appealing until you read the fine print. Whatever lease they draft will have clauses that give them control. Vivian paced the length of the workshop. Probably something about property improvements requiring approval or modification rights or automatic sale triggers if you violate terms. So, refuse the lease too. Then they'll follow through on Preston's threats. Code inspections, violations, legal fees. She stopped pacing. Garrett, I've seen them do this before. They identify what someone can't afford, time, money, stress, and apply pressure there until resistance becomes impossible. Your family sounds delightful. They used to be better, before the money got old and the influence got comfortable. When I was young, my parents actually cared about things beyond profit margins and social standing. Vivian's voice carried weight Garrett recognized as grief for something lost. My father's stroke changed him, made him sentimental and apologetic. But my mother, she's only gotten harder. Outside, Grace and Preston remained in conversation. Garrett watched them through the window, these people who'd shaped Vivian's life and indirectly his own. Grace gestured with elegant precision, making points Preston absorbed like gospel. Power and certainty radiating from people who'd never questioned their right to both. They locked you in a room for 2 weeks. Preston did. My mother just didn't stop him. And you forgave them. Vivian's silence was answer enough. Finally, she moved to stand beside Garrett, both of them watching her family through glass. Forgiveness isn't binary. I can acknowledge they hurt me terribly and also acknowledge they're my parents who I love. Both things exist simultaneously. Must be exhausting. It is. The Mercedes departed with Preston driving. Grace was probably already on her phone marshaling lawyers and resources. Garrett thought about the jewelry box, about perfection being impossible but good enough sometimes being plenty, about how his standards had calcified after loss, making compromise feel like surrender. I need to pick up Clara from school in 4 hours, need to make her dinner and help with homework and pretend everything's fine. He turned from the window. But right now, I need to understand something. If your family will pressure me until I break, regardless, why are you helping me? What do you get out of opposing them? The question landed harsh. Vivian absorbed it without flinching. Nothing. I get absolutely nothing except maybe a sense that I finally stood up to them when it mattered. 12 years late. Yes, 12 years late. But better late than never, right? Her smile was bitter. I let them control my life once. Destroy something I wanted because they decided it wasn't good enough. I won't watch them do it again to someone else. Even if that someone is me, the ex-boyfriend who probably should stay in your past. Especially because it's you. The admission hung between them, complicated and thorny. Garrett wanted to ask what she meant, whether this was about him specifically or principle generally. But Clara would be done with school in 4 hours, and he had 3,000 decisions to make before then. I need you to leave. Hurt flashed across Vivian's face before she controlled it. Of course. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Not because I'm angry. Because I need to think, and I can't do that with you here." The clarification softened the dismissal slightly. "Wednesday morning, before they send the lease. Coffee that diner on Main Street. Help me understand what I'm really looking at." "What time?" "7, before I open the shop." Vivian nodded, collected her purse. At the door she paused. "For what it's worth, I meant what I said Saturday. I'm not trying to restart anything. This isn't about us." "Then what's it about?" "Doing the right thing for once, even if it's 12 years overdue." She left before he could respond. The workshop fell silent except for machines humming on standby and wood settling in temperature shifts. Garrett returned to the jewelry box, picked up sandpaper, resumed the rhythm that kept his hands busy while his mind processed. $480,000. Enough to buy land anywhere, build new workshops, secure Clara's future education. Enough to matter in practical ways that sentiment couldn't match. The rational choice was obvious. Take the money, relocate, accept that progress sometimes meant letting go. But Natalie had helped pour this foundation, had painted the sign above the door, had stood in this exact spot planning their future while cancer grew silently inside her. Selling felt like erasing her, reducing their marriage to something disposable when market value exceeded emotional attachment. His phone buzzed. Text from Owen. "Saw the Mercedes leave. You survive." Garrett typed back. "Barely. They offered a lease." "Taking it?" "No idea." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Come to dinner tonight. Rosa's making enchiladas. You can think better with food." The kindness landed harder than it should. Owen and his wife had no obligation to feed Garrett and Clara, to provide refuge when life complicated itself, but they did anyway, consistently, without keeping score. That was friendship showing up even when it was inconvenient. He worked until 2, then drove to Clara's school. She emerged with construction paper and glitter stuck to her sleeves, evidence of art class enthusiasm. In the truck she chattered about the project, something involving tissue paper butterflies, then shifted topics with the randomness of 7. "Emma says her dad's selling their house. They're moving because someone offered lots of money." Garrett's hands tightened on the wheel. "Did Emma say why they're moving?" "Her dad got a new job somewhere else. But Emma's sad because she likes her room and doesn't want to leave her friends." Clara pulled at a loose thread on her backpack. "Do we have to move if someone offers us lots of money?" The question was innocent, seeking information, not reassurance. Garrett measured his response carefully. "Nobody's making us move, Ladybug. Our house is ours." "But what about your workshop? Emma's mom said someone wants to buy all the buildings on Mill Street." Small towns and their efficient gossip networks. Garrett should have expected Clara would hear things, process them with the logic of someone too young to understand nuance but old enough to sense problems. "Some people want to build new things where my workshop is, but I haven't decided anything yet." "Would we get lots of money?" "We might." Clara considered this, swinging her legs against the seat. "Would we still live in our house?" "Yes." "And I'd still go to my school?" "Yes." "Then I don't think we should move your workshop. Money's just money, but your workshop is where you make things for people. That seems more important." The 7-year-old philosophy was both profound and oversimplified, missing essential complexities while grasping emotional truth. Garrett wanted to explain about financial security and practical considerations, about how money wasn't just money when it bought safety and opportunity. But Clara had articulated something he'd been circling around, that value couldn't always be measured in dollars. "We're having dinner at Uncle Owen's tonight. Rosa's making your favorite. Enchiladas." Clara's mood lifted immediately. "Can I play with baby Sophia?" "If Rosa says it's okay." They stopped at home long enough for Clara to change clothes and gather homework. Garrett checked messages, found 3 from Owen asking if they were still coming, 1 from an unknown number offering free code inspection services, and 1 from Vivian containing only an address he recognized as her office location. He deleted the code inspection message, responded to Owen confirming dinner, stared at Vivian's text. The address was an invitation or information, unclear which. Finally he typed back, "Why are you sending me this?" Her response came immediately. "In case you need a lawyer, my public interest practice handles housing rights and property disputes, pro bono if necessary." The offer was generous and complicated. Accepting help from Vivian meant acknowledging connection, admitting her back into his life beyond necessary conversations about the past. But refusing meant facing Preston's legal assault alone, and pride was expensive when daughter's stability was the cost. "I'll think about it." 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. No response came. Owen's house smelled like cilantro and cumin, warm and welcoming in ways that made Garrett's rental feel empty by comparison. Rosa met them at the door with Sophia on her hip, 7 months old, and Gummy smiled. Clara immediately asked to hold the baby careful and gentle in ways that reminded Garrett she'd be an excellent older sibling if he ever managed to give her that opportunity. Over dinner, Owen asked about Preston's visit using careful language that avoided specifics around Clara. Garrett gave minimal responses, focusing on his enchiladas and avoiding details that would prompt follow-up questions. Rosa, perceptive as always, redirected conversation to safe topics, upcoming holidays. Clara's school play, whether Owen should finally fix the leak in the garage. After dinner, Clara played with Sophia on the living room floor while the adults cleaned dishes. Rosa wiped down counters with practiced efficiency. "Owen told me about the development situation. I hope you're not considering selling." "Why not?" "Because that workshop is the only place you seem happy lately. I see how you look when you talk about projects about wood grain and joinery. You light up." She rinsed the dishcloth, wrung it out. "Money's important, I know. We live paycheck to paycheck with a new baby. But some things matter more than bank accounts." "Rosa's right," Owen added from his position, drying plates. "You've been going through motions since Natalie died. The workshop is where you're still yourself." The observations stung with accuracy Garrett couldn't refute. He'd been existing rather than living, marking time while pretending forward motion. The workshop was the only space where hours passed without checking clocks, where focus narrowed to grain patterns and precise measurements instead of grief and responsibility. "They're threatening code violations if I don't cooperate." "Let them try." Rosa's voice carried steel beneath warmth. "My cousin works in the building department. He's honest, wouldn't fabricate violations for anyone. And if Preston tries pressuring him, my cousin will document everything." "Your cousin would risk his job for me." "He'd risk it for what's right. There's a difference." Owen finished the last plate, set it in the drainer. "Look, I'm not saying refuse on principle. I'm saying make sure you refuse for the right reasons. If you want to sell and move on, fine. But don't let rich people bully you into giving up something that matters." In the living room, Clara's laughter mixed with baby sounds. Garrett watched through the doorway as his daughter made silly faces to earn giggles from Sophia. 7 years old and already practicing the caregiving she'd learned from watching Natalie deteriorate. The memory landed heavy. Clara at 3, bringing her mother water, climbing into the hospital bed despite nurses' protests, reading picture books to a woman too weak to stay awake. Clara asked if we had to move. Rosa's expression softened. "What did you tell her?" "That nobody's making us." "Then keep that promise." They stayed until 8, Clara reluctant to leave but yawning too hard to argue. In the truck heading home, she fell asleep against the window. Hopper clutched tight. Garrett carried her inside, navigated bedtime routine with practiced efficiency, kissed her forehead before leaving her to dreams less complicated than waking life. Downstairs, he poured whiskey. He'd promised himself he wouldn't drink, sat at the kitchen table with his laptop. Searched property rights, eminent domain Massachusetts, and fell into rabbit holes of legal precedent and municipal authority. The more he read, the clearer the picture became. Preston could make life difficult, expensive, frustrating. But forcing a sale required proving public use necessity, demonstrating good faith negotiation attempts, offering fair compensation. The development was private, which limited eminent domain options. The code violation threats were harassment, actionable if proven. Preston had power but not absolute control. Fighting back was possible if Garrett could afford lawyers and endure the process. His phone buzzed. Text from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Bishop, this is Grace Hartley. I'd like to speak with you privately without my son's knowledge. Can you meet tomorrow afternoon?" The request activated every warning instinct Garrett possessed. Grace separating from Preston suggested division, but it could also signal more sophisticated manipulation. He typed carefully, "Why private?" "Because Preston is my son, and I love him, but I don't always agree with his methods. I believe we can find an arrangement that serves everyone's interests without the hostility." "What kind of arrangement?" "One we should discuss in person. Tomorrow, 3 o'clock, Riverside Park." Garrett stared at the message, weighing options. Meeting Grace meant walking into potential ambush, but refusing meant missing information that might prove useful. Finally he typed, "I'll be there." Her response was immediate. "Thank you. Come alone, please." He deleted the message thread, closed his laptop, finished the whiskey. Upstairs, Clara slept peacefully, unaware her father was navigating currents that could reshape their lives. Garrett looked in on her one final time, then retreated to his bedroom where Natalie's photo kept silent watch. "Your daughter asked if money was more important than making things for people. She said the workshop seems more important." He spoke to the photo out of habit formed over 3 years. "I think she's right. But I also think keeping you both safe matters more than my attachment to a building." The photo offered no guidance. Natalie frozen mid-laugh. Forever. 31, forever. Healthy, forever. Unable to help him navigate the impossible choices left behind. Grief was learning to make decisions alone after years of partnership operating on half information and guesswork. Tuesday morning arrived, cold and gray. Garrett dropped Clara at school, drove to the workshop, found Owen already inside working on the library bookshelf they'd promised for December delivery. They worked in comfortable silence until 10, when a courier arrived with an envelope from Hartley Development Group. The lease document was 50 pages of legal density that would require attorneys to parse properly. Garrett skimmed enough to confirm Vivian's warnings modification clauses that granted Preston approval rights over any changes, automatic reversion provisions. If Garrett missed payments or violated vague community standards terms, escalating rent tied to property value assessments, Preston's company would conduct. Owen read over his shoulder. "This is garbage. Aware. You showing this to Vivian. Wednesday morning. You trust her." The question deserved consideration. Garrett thought about Vivian's explanations. Her withdrawal from the case, the way she'd stood between him and her family despite having everything to lose. "I trust that her interests and Preston's don't align. That's enough for now." The rest of the day passed in focused work, Garrett losing himself in measurements and cuts that followed predictable rules. At 2:30 he left Owen to lock up, drove to Riverside Park. Grace Hartley waited on the same bench where he'd sat with Vivian days earlier, dressed casually enough to suggest she'd considered optics. She stood when he approached. "Mr. Bishop, thank you for meeting me." "Mrs. Hartley?" "Please call me Grace. We're going to be negotiating, might as well pretend we like each other." She gestured for him to join her. "I'll be direct. Preston is my son and I support his business ventures. But I don't support threatening honest people who simply want to keep their livelihoods. Could have fooled me yesterday. Yesterday, I was playing my role. Mother backing her son's legitimate enterprise. Today I'm speaking as someone who's lived long enough to recognize when a fight isn't worth fighting." Grace pulled an envelope from her purse. "This is a personal offer, not from Hartley Development, from me as an individual investor." Garrett didn't touch the envelope. "What kind of offer?" $600,000 for your property. Clean sale, no conditions, no lease complications. Enough money to relocate anywhere you choose and still have substantial savings." She set the envelope on the bench between them. "Preston doesn't know I'm making this offer. He'd be furious if he found out." "Why go around your son?" "Because Preston sees this as a test of wills, and he'll push until someone breaks. I see it as a business transaction that's become personal unnecessarily." Grace's expression was difficult to read. Sincerity and calculation blended seamlessly. "You seem like a good man, Mr. Bishop, a devoted father. I respect that. But Preston has resources and determination you can't match. This way you walk away wealthy enough to build something better elsewhere." The amount was staggering. 60% more than Preston's offer, enough to change Clara's future in tangible ways. College funds and safety nets and opportunities Garrett couldn't provide on workshop income alone. $600,000. Cash closed within 30 days, no publicity. We tell Preston you accepted his lease terms initially, then decided to sell outright. He gets his development, you get financial security, everyone saves face. Garrett watched geese land on the river, oblivious to human transactions. And what do you get? A difficult situation resolved cleanly. My son's project completed without legal battles or family drama. Vivian stops looking at me like I'm a monster. Grace's voice went quieter. I made mistakes with my daughter years ago. Hurt her badly trying to control her life. This doesn't fix that, but it's a step toward being someone she doesn't have to forgive constantly. The admission felt genuine, and that made it more dangerous. Garrett had prepared for threats and manipulation, not for apparent honesty about family wounds that echoed his own complicated relationships. I need to think about it. Of course. I'm not asking for an immediate answer. Grace stood smoothing her coat. But Preston is filing for code inspections Thursday. Once that process starts, fighting becomes expensive and exhausting. Much simpler to accept a generous offer and move on. She walked away before Garrett could respond, leaving the envelope on the bench. He sat alone, watching her drive off in a different car than yesterday's Mercedes, something European and understated that probably cost more than most houses. The envelope called to him tangible temptation. He opened it, found a cashier's check for $50,000 with a note. Good faith deposit. Accept the full offer and this is yours to keep regardless. Consider it compensation for your trouble. $50,000, more money than Garrett had seen in one place since Natalie's life insurance payout that had barely covered medical bills and funeral costs. Enough to matter to change things, to make refusing the full offer feel foolish. His phone buzzed. Text from Vivian. Still on for coffee tomorrow. He looked at the check, at Vivian's message at the park where he'd once believed love was enough to overcome any obstacle. 22 and naive, certain their future was secured by feeling rather than practical considerations. 12 years of experience had taught him feeling was dangerously unreliable. He typed back to Vivian. 7 sharp. I need your advice on something. Then he put the check in his pocket and drove home, where Clara would need dinner and homework help and reassurance that her world remained stable even when her father's was fracturing in ways she couldn't see.